ICQ Podcast, episode 324, Restoring Valve Tube Gear. Well, hello fellow amateur and radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 324th episode of the ICQ Amateur and Radio Podcast, supported as always by our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Chris Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Ed DD5 Lima Papa, Frank Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Bill Barnes Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo to discuss latest amateur and radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature on restoring valve and tube gear. Well, as always, we'd like you to think of us in terms of helping us pay our way and keeping the show advert free by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where say whatever value you find in the show and hopefully keeping your brain sane away from some of the COVID-19 scare stories. And say if you'd like to support our work, so you can pop along there and say send whatever you can. It'd be greatly appreciated. So now we're going to join Martin, Chris, Ed, Frank and Bill to discuss latest amateur ham radio news, including a long-lost US military satellite found by amateur radio operators and how ham radio is reconnecting with the general public during these troubling times. As always, hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, good evening, guys, and tonight I'd like to welcome you to the ICQ podcast, episode 324, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. I'm joined tonight by Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Evening, Martin. Hope everything's okay with you.
Yeah, we're ducking and diving and all keeping well this end. Also got Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP over in Germany. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Just getting through the lockdown here, and we're got the good news this evening that we're going to get a little bit easier on the lockdown over the next few weeks.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Moving to the other side of the pond, we got Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin and guys. Glad to be with you today.
Yeah, glad to have you. And I'm sure we'll be naughty at some point in time, Frank, won't we? Never mind. And we've also got your side of the pond, Mr. Bill Barnes, which has new call sign of a WC3B. Congrats on the call sign, Bill.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody, on this nice, dreary Pennsylvania evening.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And I see you've been through the document and edited my mistakes of putting your call sign incorrect, but I did write it down on my bit of paper, so I was
happy that you got it right eventually.
I got the new call sign right.
Martin, you just have to remember it's a Star Wars call. It's W3CBO.
All right. You know that
As in 3CPO.
Yeah, I know, but I'm now going to have to remember that, and that's going to stick in my mind, and I'm going to get into all sorts of trouble. Thank you, Frank.
Well, Rothwell's not here. Somebody's got to do it.
That's true. I'm talking to Mr. Rothwell. Unfortunately, he's on a business Skype conference call, so unfortunately he can't make it tonight. But Martin will be back with us fairly soon. Okay, starting our first conversation and news story. It's this side of the pond, but Foundation Online Training webinar was popular. EssexHam's report that a Radio Foundation Online Training webinar held on the 21st of April attracted 273 participants. Now, that's just a webinar. Who said our hobby's dead? Chris, what do you think?
Well, EssexHam have been very, very busy recently. So Pete Sickle and the guys from EssexHam have been very busy. I'm a member of the online forum for the tutors in the UK, and I was asking questions around some of the bookings, so you're probably aware that you can now take your exam online in the UK. And there's a bit of a conversation on there about that. And Pete was saying that he'd had 9 people on recent courses in the Sutton area, which is the area of where our radio covers. That's a phenomenal number of people just for our little area. So across the whole country, They're really busy, and there's lots and lots of people. Something interesting in amateur radio. Now, whether that's to do with the current situation of the lockdown, I'm not sure, but they seem to be incredibly busy, and it's really good news. Also, just on that same forum, they were talking about the number of people taking this new online exam, and they've got hundreds of people in the queue waiting to take the foundation license online. So it sounds like there's been a real big upturn in the number of people interested in amateur radio and starting to take the sort of initial foundation course and exams. So I think that's really, really good news.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, Chris. It is start to show some growth, and that'll be good. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I never cease to be amazed at what EssexHam get up to and how well they do it. So compliment to that group. They're often in the news, as we'll see on our later item we're covering as well, that they're actually at the top of a news article with the BBC. Yeah, just reading about the webinar they had, and I don't think they expected it to be as successful as it was, and good on them. And they'll continue to run their courses, and there's also the information on their website about getting to online exams in the UK as well, because of course with COVID-19 the physical exams are not being run at the moment. But yeah, good on them. More power to their elbows, as they say, and we'll keep watching what they do next.
Yeah, we certainly will. Now, moving across the other side of the pond, I know this is a UK story, Frank, but what do you think? It certainly proves that hobby ain't dead, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and I'm like Ed. I'm generally impressed with everything I see from EssexHam. I listen to their podcast frequently and that sort of thing. 273 rounded off 275 say that's a strong response, for some soccer matches for little kids or something, even if you got kids there. So if you put it in the context of ham radio, I would say that's a very strong signal from the market. And whatever they did to advertise it, I hope they will take that into account and think about why it worked, because they need to keep using it, because it looks like it's very successful. And I just remind our listeners, this was not an exam. It was to talk about their interest in perhaps getting licensed.
Yeah, it was also reading up their background information. It was people that intending to take the exam or had just taken the exam or had just taken the course, actually, and they wanted input. They wanted input to see how they could improve. All very, very positive.
That's even more so.
Yeah, certainly is. Bill, last words on this one. I know it's outside of the pond, but it's still very positive, I think.
Yeah, in addition to what everyone else said, I agree. It's a really good sign. But I will say for the folks listening, if you're working with your own clubs and deciding what to do, reach out and touch base with these folks in Essex, because they got some of this figured out. And however they advertised it to get 273 to watch it live and a whole bunch more to watch it after the fact as recorded. It's a really good sign, and it probably can be replicated all over the place and get more interest in the hobby from all different angles. And now may actually be a really good time around the world to show people some, here's a hobby you can do all the time in all stages of your life under pretty much all situations. So it's really good that they're sharing this with everyone as well.
And it is a very sociable hobby. Let's be honest, I know that most amateurs are now on the air far more than they ever were. But we are a very sociable bunch, majority of us anyway. We like talking to people, so it does prove how good our hobby is. And for those in lockdown, this must be a godsend, I would have thought.
Well, I was just on that subject, Martin. Our net, we've been holding a net every Monday night since the lockdown. Well, actually, we've been holding anyway, but recently it's become very, very popular. And we're getting sort of 9-10 people every Monday night on the net, which is unheard of recently, recent times. So actually, that's very, very good. So yeah, I can definitely echo what you said there, Martin.
Yeah, well, our net has kind of taken over from our meeting on a Monday night, where most of the guys used to get together and chew the fat. So At least it allows us to continue in somewhat of a group. Moving on, a long-lost US military satellite found by amateur radio operator. So, it was launched in 1967. I was still at school then. But, yeah, it's quite a long time ago. Suddenly an amateur finds it. Frank, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, it's an amazing story on the one hand, and in our pre-show discussion, we talked about, hey, doesn't NASA keep up with these things? Well, having worked with NASA, they use a lot of contractors. So the true blue NASA folks, they got jobs to do, and since it was sort of decommissioned in terms of the sphere of its authorization, as they would say in NASA, hey, it's out there. Well, what's really wonderful about this story, in my view, is that this ham in Canada is like astronomers who are amateur astronomers, and they tend to be the ones to find the new comets. Not always, but there are many, many amateur astronomers who identify new comets. Well, this person found this satellite, and good on him. It's just another sign of what the hobby of amateur radio does for the research element, understanding how satellites transmit. Very, very weak signal. Most of us would never even look at a small blip on a screen to say, what is that? So I think he's done some very, very good work, and I'm delighted that we're lifting up what Mr. Tilley has done, and I just say bravo.
Yeah, it's quite a phenomenal thing to do, because being a military satellite, I would imagine that any data coming off it is encrypted, so it would just look like rubbish, I would have thought. But, to be able, he must know the frequency and the rough time it would be coming over.
Well, he found a research paper. Now, Bill Barnes is a professional in the IT world and dealing with things like encryption, so I'll be interested to hear his comment. But, back in 1967, I suspect it was hidden in plain sight. I mean, who had access to receiving a satellite back in 1967? There was probably little concern about encrypting it back then. But I don't know. I'll defer to Bill's judgment on that.
Okay, Frank, it's fair comment on that one. Bill, what's the story?
I actually follow Scott on Twitter, and he's doing this kind of stuff all the time, where he's looking for signals, trying to identify unknown signals, trying to search for stuff that's lost. A lot of times someone will send a CubeSat up. They won't get the initial beacons out of it where they expect. Well, he sometimes finds them. Sometimes finds some other things. In the NPR article, he talks about finding the image probe, which was lost in 2005. He found that in 2018. On this particular one, this one's really interesting because this is the beacon on this satellite is on 236.750 megahertz. This is actually a UHF satellite. So I'm used to, SHF, microwave bands and that kind of stuff. But this one's actually just above the 220 meter band. So it's an interesting, just by that simple fact. Not sure about the encryption coming off this thing. I can say that they had the ability back then. So I don't know the technical specs, if this thing actually, what this mission for this device was. However, the fact that it was, quote unquote lost, and it's zombie. Basically, his definition of zombie is it's a satellite that's up there, but it's not currently under telecommand. So this one's, supposedly parked in a graveyard orbit, so it doesn't interfere with anything. And he went through the whole set of tweets on Twitter showing the things that he found it, and he figured out it was the exact satellite he was looking for based on the frequency it was beaconing, and when it went into an eclipse at the correct time for where it was supposed to be parked in graveyard orbit. And it's like, yep, that's it. So if you're on the Twitter, which not everybody is, Scott is one of the more interesting guys to follow. because he posts stuff about signals that he finds. Hey, I found this. Has anyone else seen this? Hey, this is interesting. Does anyone have any further details on what this could be? And he goes back and forth with various folks, because there is a significant amount of folks out there that spend time doing what I call signal searching, and they really do a bang up job once they figure out once they get a clue what it could be. They start reverse engineering what it is, and a lot of times they'll find payloads that were either declared lost, that should have been burned up, that didn't quite get there yet, and so they can kind of figure out where it's coming down at. There's a lot of nuances to this once they get to it, but the NPR article is actually really fun. So when you get the show notes, check it out, because I remember the story on NPR a couple weeks ago, so it's a nice article to read.
Yeah, it's a nice one. The fact that an amateur's found that, which I think was good.
I'm just looking at there's also a link on here to an article by Taylor Bates talking about the telemetry format. And what's interesting is that it's like they've used a software-defined radio to capture the RF coming from the satellite. And then the great thing there, of course, you don't have to be listening live. You can record some RF, you can record the baseband, the kind of the RF spectrum for that bit of the spectrum that it's coming from. Then you can play it back into your heart's content and play with it and tweak it. And they figured out the format of the telemetry coming from it. So I don't think it is encrypted. I think it's there's a beacon on board with telemetry information. That's what they've been looking at, its information, and they've kind of figured out the structure and things. And it's actually quite an interesting article talking about the information and what it represents and the sort of kind of how it's been structured. So I think they've actually managed to find some really old technical documents that help them as well on that. So yeah, interesting stuff, and amazing. They can find something from history and find it still working.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris, in that with the new technology of SDR and be able to record a whole spectrum of RF, must make it easier. There's still a great deal of work goes into it and that, but just proves how modern technology is really helping us. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, well, I think as has been said already, Scott Tilley has sort of found several lost satellites over the years. I was reading an article about him a couple of days ago. And in the case of this one, he's also put out a request for if there's any people that actually worked on the LES-5 satellite originally, either from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology or the contractors that built it, to see what else they can find out about it. So he's really going in like a historian. The VHF beacon, Bill, 236 is below 300 megs, mate. The fact that he found it there when he was looking for something else, I wonder if the older satellites all had their stuff around 200 megs rather than, as you say, nowadays it's up a lot higher often. If this was operational in 1967 and went missing, does this now make it the oldest still operational satellite? I guess it's not operational, is it? I mean, it's beaconing, but it's not doing any actual work. But up until now, the AMSAT Oscar 7 has been the oldest satellite up there that's still working. Perhaps the LES-1 now is the oldest, but as you say, if you can't control it to do things, then it probably doesn't count.
Yeah, AO7's in use. They're still bouncing signals through the transponders. This thing's parked in a graveyard, so I'm assuming it's, not in use.
Yeah, but I mean, if they can find out how to re-enable it and get it working, but again, it was never an amateur satellite, was it? It was always military.
Right. It may not have
so it's not
any kind of linear payload on it or anything like that.
No.
It probably just accepts telecommands and then sends down telemetry.
It could very well be. I looked at the Voyager series, and it was 77 when Voyager 1 was launched. So, Ed, you could be correct.
But it's not actually operational, so that's the difference, I guess.
Well,
Get to reboot Voyager 2.
Yeah. Well, they don't know.
It
Voyager
mo-
1 is beyond, we think, beyond reception now, I guess.
As far as I know, they're still receiving both on the Deep Space Network.
Okay. All right.
Both of those machines boggle my mind how far they are away from us now.
Oh,
And the fact that they're still working is just amazing to me. Just the engineering that went into these things. Just everybody should be proud of that.
But any of our listeners who are bored with amateur radio, this would be something that you might poke into and follow Scott. Because if you don't get excited about this, then you may need another hobby, because this truly is an exciting part of signal intelligence or signal listening in the satellite stuff. And you've got a group of people who are very passionate about it too.
Yeah, and it's something that what we refer to as a shortwave listener, but it's something that a shortwave listener could get involved with, because
actually don't have to have a ham license to do this.
Correct. So, anybody who's interested in radio fancies doing a bit of interesting listening, as more and more of the shortwave broadcast stations are disappearing. This might be a new venture for their hobby, I would suggest.
Yeah, and with the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, Martin, with an SDR, even the cheaper SDR dongles, that you can record a block of frequency range and then look at it and analyze it later separately. That kind of technology as well is amazing for let's say, a modern generation shortwave listener. Something that, back in the 60s, 70s, might not have been able to receive 200 megs. Now it's easy with these cheap computer-driven receivers.
And Ed, you're correct in the low noise amplifier that's really needed to go with that. There's been a parallel amount of progress in getting cheap LNAs in the marketplace. So putting those together, as you said, it's the cost of a pizza, and you could be in business if you already got a computer and you got to then come up with an antenna. So you're exactly right.
But all in all, that's a good time for our hobby. Okay, I'm going to roll the next two news stories together. The first one is Beyond Exam Resources, launched by the RSGB to give people some information of what they can do and bits and pieces by the RSGB. And at the same time, for the guys the other side of the pond, the FCC is providing flexibility to volunteer examiners in developing remote testing methods. So, Chris, you go first on this one.
Yeah, sure. So the Beyond Exams, I don't know if it's earlier actually. Well, I saw this when it came out on the email a few days ago from the RSGB. It's actually quite good. It's pretty much what you said on the tin. It's giving you things to do once you've passed your exam. I think a lot of us get out, start off in the hobby. We get out, we pass our get our license, pass our test, get our license, and then it's like, okay, now what we're going to do. And it's almost like this is encouraging to try a range of things out. So, to sort of figure out whereabouts in the hobby is it that you want to play. We all know this hobby is massively, massively wide. There's a huge number of things you can do. And this is almost like setting little challenges to go away and do some things and try some things out. There's a bit of an award scheme around it. I think you can get an award for various things. But you can, the idea is that you've got 24 activities. It works in tandem with clubs. So it's not, I think there are two schemes. There's a club scheme and an individual scheme. But great that they're actually involving clubs in this as well, rather than just trying to get to do it on their own. So I think doing it as part of it is a great idea. There's a bunch of kind of tasks you're given, and you get points and things, and you can get awards. So no, I think it's a great way to get people still. And once you pass your exam, I think there's a danger that you might lose interest. I think it's a way of getting people to continue to have an interest in the hobby and maybe go for the next exam, for example. So I think it's probably aimed at beginners, people that should perhaps just pass their foundation exam. But I think it's a great idea, and let's hope it's a success.
Well, the other thing we got to think of, Chris, is that in these strange times, there are people coming back into the hobby who haven't been on the air for a while. And let's be honest, I've been in this hobby 20 years, and I know that's not very long from some of you who've been sort of since the year dot. But there's been phenomenal changes in the last 20 years of what the hobby is actually and what's happening and what we do. So it could be just also useful for somebody coming back into the hobby to start to get a handle on some of the new things.
Very true, actually. So, well, I was going to say, I mean, I know people that come back into the hobby that actually sometimes perhaps lose a little bit of confidence because they haven't operated radio in 20, 30 years, and sometimes a little bit shy. So actually, I think, yeah, absolutely, it might be a good way to kind of ease people back in. So I think that's a good point, Martin. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was going. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just echoing what you were saying as well, Martin. I think the other point that's actually in the article here, it says that in these challenging times, so the COVID-19 pandemic, beyond exams is an important part of our Get on the Air to Care campaign in partnership with the NHS. So as you're quite rightly saying, people that are coming back to the hobby and getting on the air rather than being isolated at home because of the lockdown, this beyond exams resources might be very useful to them as well as newcomers, and that's all good. And that's basically all I can say. Good on the RSGB.
Yeah. Well, we're pleased for them on that one. And guys, the other side of the pond, you've got the FCC providing flexibility. So, Bill, do you want to go first on this one?
Yes, please. That's, the RSGB is pulling together this cohesive effort on your side. One of the pieces is, getting people trained, getting people licensed, in addition to this, a whole bunch of other stuff about getting on the air, which is great. But we actually had folks asking the FCC and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau if we're even allowed to do remote testing. And they're just like, yeah, They put out a one-page clarifying document saying, yeah, your volunteer examiner coordinators are allowed to test remotely. It's whatever you guys want to do. It's good to go. So that cleared up a lot of confusion, right, Frank?
Yeah. It was on the equivalent of thou shalt. And I think that clarified it a lot. Here's what I would add. The ARL has this lifelong learning thing that was started under CEO Howard Mickle and the board. And here the RSGB has the Get on the Air to Care as part of their Beyond exam pages. Here's an analogy. High schools in the U.S. and colleges both have guidance counselors and career placement services. Now, the amateur radio hobby, as much sometimes as we make it a full-time job, it's not a job, it's a hobby, but you are federally licensed. So if you think about it, what we've gone from go to the FCC, have some person look over their glasses at you, make you nervous as all get out, and maybe you'll pass, so then you're on your own, and then you're in the arms of your Elmer and clubs. How do we have a package that is the equivalent of the career placement service? And the career placement service in this case is you've got a ticket, perhaps. Now let's get you engaged in the hobby. Because in the U.S., from the best data that I'm aware of, at best, 50% of the active members are in clubs. The other half are not in club. So you can't just throw it to the clubs, or you're going to miss out a lot of people. So I think this National Society effort to try to put a package together and propagate that out there it sort of anticipates that problem where we're losing people that get their license. So I just think this is leadership by the Radio Society of Great Britain, of which I'm a member, and I just like it a lot. And I hope that we continue to do this kind of thinking and put this kind of stuff together.
Yeah, I agree with you, Frank. There's a lot of positive thinking going on at the moment, and a lot of positive things are happening in the hobby. And I defy anybody to argue with that one because, there's more people on the air at the moment. There's more people interested in getting exams. There's more ways that the societies are trying to get people into the hobby. They're making more resources available. So, in fairness, this is a good time to look at our hobby, I would suggest. All right, moving on. Our Dan Romacek, KB6 NU had a blog post out, and it said, "A way back to relevance for amateur radio." And this was a presentation done at the RSGB by Camille, Dr. Camille Singh, M0IOV, and we arrived at the RSGB convention last year, Chris and I, and it was suggested quite strongly that we went to this lecture. Now, I didn't realise they'd videoed and recorded it, but Frank tells me I'm in it.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Frank? Go on, you go first on this one.
Well, I had not seen the video, and I don't know Dr. Kamal Singh, but I'm delighted that I got the link because I've watched his video at least twice now, then kind of rewound it, if you will, on YouTube and looked at parts of it. Dan's blog post is a very good one. Dan always writes interesting things. Dan's a very clear and coherent thinker. And so he sort of went bravo in principle to this. Kamal talks about the future and growth of amateur radio, about being relevant. And as someone who's kind of done future forecasting and demographic change and things like this, I would add a few things. I think it's a really good video for people to watch. He really does a good job. Now, unfortunately, because of some work obligations that he's involved with, Dr. Singh is leaving the RSGB board due to work constraints, and that's unfortunate for amateur radio and the society. A couple of things that he talks about: relevance. I'd add relevant to whom? And you might think, well, relative to everybody. Well, eating and breathing is relevant to everybody. So let's think about, in practical terms, relevant to whom? If the hobby becomes not so relevant to the authorizing agency, which gives it access to spectrum, then they're really in a pickle. So at minimum, you got to stay relevant to the authorizing agency, which is whether it's Ofcom, Federal Communications Commission, or what have you. His second point of we were the portal for technology, and I think he's correct. But that's rooted in the people who were young at a certain point in history, and we've kind of carried that out. And as the comic strip character Pogo said once, we've met the enemy and he's us. Well, us graybeards are part of that group, whether we were licensed back then or like me or late in life ham. And there was nothing amateur radio, I would submit, could have done to become equally, to maintain the portal for technology. There was nothing we could have done. It's just that technology has sprung up around us. And I think Dr. Singh sort of makes that point, and he comes back to saying, how can we be relevant? And he argues that we need to choose some clear challenges and jump on it together, and let's make some progress. I think we're doing some of that. Jack Pardum, Dr. Pardum here in the Midwest in the U.S. of A., along with our friend over in India, Farhan of BidX fame, they and some other scientists have built a new open source ventilator for the COVID crisis and some things like that. So I really encourage our listeners, if they've not gone to the RSGB website or the South Arc or the show notes for this podcast when it's out, and seen that link, you're missing out. I think it's just a great way for us to continue to think about who we are as a hobby and this notion of relevance.
Agree with you, Frank. And it was an interesting discussion. I'm going to let Bill go first before I'll pass it this side of the pond. So, Bill, any thoughts on this one?
No, in all seriousness, you started asking a question at 41 minutes, 55 seconds. It's a good question, by the way. Good question. It's a 46-minute video. It made me think. It'll probably make everyone else think as well. Case in point, he talks about the third industrial revolution, how the complexity of electronics and stuff changed, and we just didn't keep track. Amateur radio did not keep pace with those changes. So we dropped off as being the gateway drug into, engineering careers. And he talks about the fourth industrial revolution, which is very fascinating. And as I grouse about certain technologies that are coming along, such as 5G, I grouse about that kind of stuff. But he brings up the point about you gotta embrace this stuff. You gotta get out there. You gotta we gotta offer something to keep up with these industrial revolutions, to be exactly what Frank was talking about, relevant. And so I really think that the neatest thing that, just watch the video. It's 46 minutes when you get a chance. I'm usually not keen on watching videos, so I'm more of an audio guy. But this was a good one. It was a good one.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed being there. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
I've actually got no comment. I haven't watched the video yet. I wasn't at the Hamfest, and therefore I don't think anything I would say would be relevant.
Sorry about that, Ed. I think this one, okay, the RSGB have put this one out. Dan picked up on it. We probably concentrated more on the ICQ presentation of Grow, Merge or Disband Your Club talk that Chris and I did at the convention. And that's probably why we didn't pick it up. I apologise, because it is a good talk. Chris, you were there with me.
Yeah, I've got no excuse. I was in the room, so I've got no excuse. I definitely heard it. I think it was very thought-provoking. I think Kamal's a very intelligent guy. And yeah, I think that relevance question is very key. We've done something to. Yeah, I think it's pretty much saying, we've sort of we've taken a bit of a wrong turning in the past, perhaps, and we need to sort of try and get back on track. But we need some very radical thinking. He was kind of thinking about getting on the back, essentially getting on the bandwagon, getting on the back of some new technology coming along. There's an awful lot of radio even though we don't think of it as radio, things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, the whole Internet of Things is all based on devices that sit in your house or sit in your shop or factory or whatever it is, workplace, that talk to the Internet, but they're all talking over radio. And there's all kinds of things on the horizon which, things like driverless cars are all going to rely on technology that's involving wireless communications. So he was very much advocating we need to find something along those lines, something that's new and exciting that we can kind of come to that. So, I think he was saying this initial evolution, this idea that we've got this next, just over the horizon, we've got this, even though we're really high tech now, just thinking of the future and trying to get on the back of that. So I think it's about some fairly radical ideas. I think we started off saying, look, this company's not got much of a future. Look around the room, everyone's of a certain age, and we're not seeing. I'm not saying that. We started tonight's episode talking about people getting involved and wanting to do training and things. So we'll see. But I was very much one of those thought-provoking talks and make us think about what we might do to grow the hobby in the future.
Yeah, Chris, and as I say, it was interesting because he was talking about industrial revolutions and things like that I suppose a lot of us didn't realise, and we kind of went through another industrial revolution in the 70s, and that's when amateur radio really lost its relevance. But there's an opportunity for us to get back in, so that's good news. Moving on, Ed, you put this one in. The RASA launches a new amateur radio guidebook for newcomers. Over to you, Ed.
Yeah, this is something that's just come up. The RASA is one of the two organisations that represent radio amateurs in Australia, and they've done a little bit in the past towards helping people that are new into the hobby, and it fits quite nicely into what we talked about earlier on about getting people into the hobby, etc. And then what happens? Somebody takes the license, and then what do you do after that? And this free PDF book, the link to it is in the show notes, of course, is actually very well written. It is written for the Australian band plans and the Australian radio amateur, but if you take the 5% out, which might be the bands that are used in Australia, and put them to the side, the rest of the content of the book is still very relevant to new people getting into or coming back into the hobby, no matter where they are. And some of the other people on this show had looked at it well and said, well, it's also interesting, not just for people starting or getting back into the hobby, but as a general, what's happening in the hobby kind of book that would be useful to a lot of people. At the moment, it's a free PDF. It's going to be available for Kindle, Nook, Kobo, etc., and Apple Books. But yeah, the link is in the show notes, and they say it's a free service or a free book from RASA in Australia. But I'm sure they'll be very happy no matter who downloads it and uses it, because it's another way of promoting the hobby.
Yeah, certainly is, Ed. Certainly is, and I thought it's a very, very good book. So, Chris, I would suggest this would be a good one, if not just for our club, but for every club, to put a link to this book for download in their club newsletter, wouldn't you think?
That's what I'll be doing probably this weekend. We'll have to write this week's newsletter, so this month's newsletter, so absolutely. And this sort of reminds me, a lot of clubs are doing something, societies are doing something similar. So this is great. This is a kind of one-off document. I think it's 34 pages, an awful lot of information. Some of it relevant specifically to Australia, things like bandstands, that sort of thing. But the majority of it is very, very useful information to a starter in any part of the world, really. It sort of reminds a little bit like we've got with some of the other societies. So, for example, the RSGB do Radcom Basics. So that's not a one-off document like this is. This is really good. They have like a magazine which aimed at the beginner, aimed at the foundation, and so forth. But it's still useful to everybody. And the AWOL have On the Air magazine, which is again aimed, I think, at people that have just got licensed to get started. So it's giving really useful information to get someone up and running, and a bit like the Beyond Exams thing you're doing, it's kind of giving people that support they might need right from the start. Clubs can do that as well, but I think this is good for people to have as a reference. And so yeah, I'd absolutely suggest, this is a great thing. It's free. People get them into it. Clubs can use it, etc. So I think it might be even something that clubs give away when once they get the license. So right, okay, well, when you pass your test, and there's something to go take away, maybe on a studio something or a print out that's got to print out. That's your sort of starter guide. Off you go, and it's really good.
Agree with you totally, Chris. It's a good one. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I really like this guide. One of the things that stuck out at me is, I always jump to antenna areas of books because everybody likes messing around with antennas, and they did they do things like telling you here's what different kinds of antennas are. Okay, by the way, if you need some more help, you can reach out to your local folks. You can reach out to us. Also, by the way, Peter Parker, VK3YE, provides a great introductory articles and videos on simple antennas, and they give links to his YouTube channel and his website. That is like the best advice I can give anybody on antennas in 2020 is go check out Peter Parker's stuff. The other one that jumped out at me is I want to read a chunk of this from page 18. Working DX. For many radio amateurs, chasing DX long distance is what the hobby is all about. Now you have my attention, guys. Your license gives you access to some great DX bands. Start by reading a little bit about propagation and what you can expect on each bands. Set realistic targets. DX might be meaning working the other side of the Pacific, Australia, or maybe New Zealand. Okay, guys, that is like a beautiful introductory hook. You got me. There's 5,000 things you can do in the hobby. A lot of people do the DX, and they encapsulated, 3 pages of stuff in one paragraph, and then they turned her off and did the best thing ever, which was the next page. They go through the DX code of conduct, which is that once again just amazing advice. So I'm very happy with this document, and I hope other folks share this around with new folks, maybe even some seasoned folks. I drive people crazy online because, I'll hear them on bands and I'll send them an email with the DX code of contact, little tongue-in-cheek thing. It's not really tongue-in-cheek, but I send it off as a joke to give them a hard time. But at the same time, just bringing this concept up right off the bat at a new beginner thing with Ralph, just amazing advice. And so I think they really did a good job on this document. this will be something that'll stick around and will be shareable and usable by folks and clubs for years to come, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bill. I think you're right. Frank, last words on this one. What are your thoughts?
I echo about everything that Bill just said, but let me focus on maybe 2 or 3 aspects of this. It's very well edited, as Bill said. It's concise. Now, you buy the ARL handbook, antenna book, they're all great. I mean, I have them. I have a bunch, but they're voluminous. This is concise. Now, that gets people's attention. Number 2, it's a modern document, what some people call a living document. And by that, heaven forbid, when Peter Parker becomes a silent key or Steve Ellington on the infed antenna becomes a silent key, or that website goes away or what have you, they can change that URL. Nobody knows the difference other than there's a different source. So that's a living document. And thirdly, I've been doing what we used to call typesetting, back in the print days, but layout, done some of that professionally, and I was very impressed with how they laid this out. They've got a lot of neat illustration. They put it together well. And I'll just end with this. It's really a good document. When you think about, and say, using Bill as an example, he's a DXer, loves it. That's where his passion is, partly. Well, we all come in and we kind of do certain things. And we can be a veteran and then realize, I've never really done DXing. What's that about? Well, here's a very concise introduction. So it's not just for the newcomer, but for what we might call the old comer who's going to come to another part of the hobby. Bravo on them. Free is a good price, at least for the time being. Go get it while it's hot.
Right, and our last news story, Corvus virus. As much as we try not to talk about it, amateur radio is connecting people during the lockdown. A massive publicity stunt once again on the BBC News website. Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the link for this is again in the show note, but it's really a very well written article telling the general public about the fact that amateur radio enthusiasts are getting through the lockdown problems and the psychological problems very well. But at the same time, it goes further than that. It explains quite a bit more about amateur radio to the general public. The author of it is a lady called Vanessa Pierce, but I think she must have some contact that actually is a radio ham because of the accuracy of this article. It's really, really, really well done. There's also a short review that's actually done by Jim Lee, who is a radio ham. A bit further down one section, he's put in there about amateur radio, but the whole article is definitely worth reading. I'll let the others comment on parts of it. But it's basically saying, look, this is a hobby that is actually growing because we're adapting, but it actually fits the situation where you're actually locked down and you can't go anywhere. You can still stay in contact with people and keep sane, basically. And it also mentions the association with the NHS, with the GOTA2C, Get on the Air to Care, with the National Health Service. So that's also good to have in there. Yeah, I don't know. We want to throw this round to Chris or somebody next, Martin?
I can chat on if you want. So, yeah, first thing is, the picture on the news story is Pete Sippel and the EssexHam guys, and I'm not sure whether Pete was involved in getting this in the news, but if he has, he's done a fabulous job. But yeah, lots of people mentioned in the article that I either know or have heard of mentioned Jim. So Jim actually works. It's interesting. They sort of refer to Jim as a BBC source, but of course Jim is an amateur. But Jim's also a BBC news radio and announcer. And we know Jim because we've spoken before on the podcast. And the BBC was opened 2 or 3 years ago for Broadcasting House. We interviewed Jim there, so we know him fairly well. And I've spoken before on the radio and met him at various events. But no, I mean, great that we've got this in the news. Great this has got national coverage in the UK and how it's relevant to these current lockdowns. So well done to all the people that were involved in doing this. It's a great article, like you say, Ed was saying. It's well written, it's accurate. Lots of faces on there that are recognised from the hobby, and it's great that it's there and it's promoting what we do.
Certainly is, Chris. Certainly is. And I think we did well as a hobby to get that there. Guys, I know it's our side of the pond, but Frank, what do you think?
Well, it's a great story, and I agree with everything that's been said. There's research that shows very often people in very large cities, New York City, San Francisco perhaps, feel more lonely than people out in much smaller towns. Well, why is that? And this illustrates it because this amateur radio gives an opportunity to activate a sense of community when, because of a social policy, a lockdown, you can't. Then all of a sudden you realize it. You know, if you're in New York City or London, you're around so many people, and yet you may feel very lonely, but unless you're in a pub or someplace where you know other people. So this is one of the sort of hidden or not always seen elements of amateur radio. Can't pick up a cell phone and just dial a random number too many times and get away with it. The bobbies will come get your phone, right? But you can with amateur radio. So I see that as a way of exposing the technology in our hobby in a way that's very pro-social. And this is just a great story about it. I was really happy to see it.
Yeah, it's very well done. Bill, last thoughts on this one? I know it's our side of the pond, but I thought it was quite good.
Frank, what?
Yes, sir.
Why do you work up an article like this for the New York Times? Get
Didn't I work one up for the New York Times?
This is great.
Well, I don't know, but it is a good article.
No, exactly, and I really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed reading about Anne Marie's running a net twice a week. The 11-year-old running the net. It's like, now that's what I like to see. Cornwall, that's northern England.
About as far south as you can get, southwest as you can get, mate.
Hey, that's almost in Edmund Spicer territory, right?
Well,
further south than that, even, yeah.
Yeah, it's further south because Ed's on the south coast. This is way southwest. Then,
sticky out, but isn't it? Really, yeah.
Anyway, I think that's really neat. The whole article is really well done. I like how they went through it in like not really sections, but basically they put concepts together before they even got to the Jim Lee part of the article. So by the time you got there, you kind of had an idea of what you were reading, and then Jim Lee was talking about it in his section. So they did a really good job on this. A little jealous, actually. We need this kind of press on this side of the pond.
Well, as I say, I think it was a great piece of work, and all I hope is we see more publicity like this for the hobby because it's great. It's great.
It should be noted, however, that this is on the BBC website, the BBC News Show website. It's not actually in a national newspaper, unfortunately.
No, but a lot of people now read stuff online rather than on paper. So
yeah, and would this come up in the BBC News app? It probably would, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw it there. In fact, I don't mind it. I mean, not many folks, talking to myself now, I certainly don't buy newspaper on paper or even online. BBC News is where I go for most of my news, so I spotted this almost straight away when I saw it come online. So, a lot of people are saying this, especially in the UK.
Yeah. Well, on the newspaper front, going off on a real tangent, I pick up the Free Metro. Now, it cannot be called a newspaper because there aren't much news in it, but I do the Sudoku. So that's the only reason I do it. Hi. Anyway, bit naughty, I know. Okay, guys, that concludes the news stories. Let's find out what you've been up to since the last time we've been together. Ed, what have you been up to?
I've actually solved a problem that I've been chasing for the last probably 3 weeks with my radio gear that I use for the Summits on the Air portable operation. I've been getting reports of bad audio on the single sideband, and my assumption was it's RF getting back into the audio stages of the rig. So I spent ages trying to track that down. Was it coming in through the accessory socket? Was it coming in through the microphone? Different microphones, different leads, ferrite cores, decoupling capacitors, etc., etc., etc. I then decided, hang on, let's do like an IT guy does. Let's isolate this and let's find out where the problem really is. So This problem was occurring only when I was using the rig with my little portable amplifier that I've built. And because the rig's QRP, the amplifier gives me about 50 to 70 watts, which makes a difference sometimes in the bad band conditions. But anyway, so I thought, okay, I'll isolate this problem. I'll try the rig into my home 300 watt amplifier. And of course, I'm going to get the RFI then, aren't I, as well, the RF ingress? No, absolutely clean. Turns out the problem was in the amplifier. The amplifier was built to spec. It was built and set exactly the way the instructions said and adjusted and everything else, but the bias level was wrong. And the amplifier was actually running probably into class B or something, and hence the signal was getting distorted. It just shows you adjusted the BIOS to the correct level, not to what was given in the instructions. So based on the current drawn, not the voltage they gave, and problem's gone away. And I'm really relieved, because it's taken me probably over 3 weeks to find that problem. But it just shows you, when you get set on a problem and you think it's a certain area, you keep working at it. If at some point you can stop and say, hang on, maybe it's not what I think it is, and then somehow isolate parts of the equipment, it's a very good fault-finding method to use, that you can then realise that you've just wasted 2 weeks trying to find a problem that wasn't in that part of the equipment. But I'm really happy about that. So I've got all my equipment now ready for when I next get off and up a summit somewhere, which the way things are looking might be in about 2 weeks' time.
Right. So that sounds good, mate. That sounds good. Frank, what have you been up to since the last time we had a chat?
I've done a couple of things. One, I was very honored to be a guest speaker via the technology of Zoom to the Denby Dale Amateur Radio Society in Huddersfield. It's south of Leeds, northwest of Sheffield, and east of Manchester for the listeners on this side of the pond. And Nick Bradley, G4IWO, was my contact point. I'm not sure how many people. It might have been about 30-ish. Was there on Zoom. Went on for about 2 hours talking about the future of amateur radio. I had not seen Dr. Singh's video at that point. I wish I had. But I talked about some similar things. And what a lovely club. They are doing a lot of this. And I understand M1MRB was their guest last night. And Don Field of Practical Wireless is coming up. And I'm just delighted to have been honored with that. And they even tolerated my imbibing one of those nasty Belgian beers, but it was in an official British pint glass that I have. So I was involved with that group and doing some follow-up work with them about marketing their club. That was number one. Number two, Ed, DD5LP, has been working with me and a team of both portable operators, some of whom do soda activation like Ed does and has achieved quite a bit, and some True Blue contesters who are very active in contesting. And what we're trying to do is a concept work. Can we put together a portable operations challenge where traditional contesters, the big guns of the world, can they compete with portable operators if we come up with some ways to handicap the scores based upon distance per watt and then some other multipliers? So Ed's been involved with me with that, and we're getting close to finalizing that. Our steering committee will be hammering out the final scoring metric, and if we can come to terms with that, we'll announce that publicly probably in the next month. But that's captured a good bit of my time while we've been in lockdown here in Mississippi.
Right. Well, it sounds like you have been busy, and you've also been very, very busy on Facebook, Frank. I know you have, because I've seen every morning there's half a dozen posts from Frank.
Oh, you got to do something when you're drinking your coffee, right?
You got to do something, mate. Especially when the wife's watching 1970s TV. Hi. Oh, dear. I'll get into trouble for that one. Right. Bill, what have you been up to?
quite a bit. The advantage of working from home is I have a lot more time to do stuff because I don't have that commute to, suck time away. Likewise, the legions of children don't have, 10,000 activities going on to also, pull you out of the shack. So when I brought my stuff home from work, I just kind of rearranged the desk in the shack, and so I am working in the shack. It's awesome. Back in about the middle of April, we had a pretty significant windstorm go through, and so my I affectionately call this the Hurricane Floyd doublet because it got destroyed during Hurricane Floyd. It was originally a G5 RV for 160 meters. Everyone can laugh at this point because it's a monstrosity. That got destroyed and recycled and repurposed 13 or 14 times now. Well, it's currently up as a doublet. I have, I don't know, a lot of bladder line coming down to right before it goes in the house. So last year it broke off on the one side and broke that center. It was last year or the year before. Anyway, it center conductor, the center antenna support broke. The one side broke. Had to end up having to cut about 12 inches off. So it's not quite balanced. Well, now the other side broke off 3 inches, so it's a little bit closer to being balanced now. So I got that fixed when the weather was nice. Our local amateur radio emergency service Aries group, for this year, they want everybody to fill out an ARRL Aries task book. So I started working on that the last couple months. Well, one of the things I noticed in there is I haven't been recertified for National Weather Service Skywarn, which is probably the most common thing I do to help out is, do Skywarn spotting here as local weather happens. They were going to have a class, and the class got canceled for obvious reasons. So they took the class online. So I did the webinar session, and I even tried to drag the kids to watch it. I need to have a call with Colin so I can compare the belly aching from the teenagers, because him and I usually have this, whose kids belly ache more about having to do stuff. By the way, he usually wins. They didn't make it through the whole training, but it was worth a shot. And then I might have gotten a new call around the 21st of April, and you would think that I would be, hammering out, contacts like crazy, but I haven't. I did a bunch of FT8 because I'm weak, and FT8's easy. I did do one soda chase. I got a K0DAJ out in Colorado activating on 20 meter sideband one day. And I also worked 2 stations with the new call on CW on 20 meters. AO. I'm thinking of a satellite. 40 stroke Echo 73 Alpha. I got them around the 22nd. And then on the 25th, I worked OH6 Stay Home. So I'm scrolling around the band on the flex, and everybody goes too fast on CW, I swear. But I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I'm listening to, is this guy CQing or is he doing a QSO? Because I think he just sent the word home. And so I sat there and listened and listened and listened. It actually took me longer to copy the 6 than the word stay home because he was going so fast. But I actually picked him up. And then finally, not amateur radio related, but general electronics related, back in February, I got Ben Eater's breadboard kit for building your own 6502 computer. It's like a challenge. You have to wire the thing up. So I did that, and I had a lot of fun. Well, 2 things. One thing was, after, what year is this, 2020? So it would have been 34 years. I still remember 6502 assembler. That's kind of freaky and weird. And I'm not talking like a little bit. I'm talking like I started, typing in opcodes, and I'm, writing EPROMs and stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. Very, very, very bicycle like riding, deja vu, weird experience. But the other thing I did recently with it was I enjoyed it so much. I'm like, boy, I really should transplant this from a breadboard to a circuit board so I can have like a small computer here. 6502 so I can do some more experimenting, because working on breadboards can be frustrating at times if you knock the wrong wires out. So one of the guys in the Reddit group for this particular Ben Eater projects posted some GitHub link for some board design, so I shipped it off. A couple bucks. It actually costs more to ship it than get the board made. They showed up, so I soldered it up, and I now have sitting here in the shack, about 4-inch by 4-inch 6502 small board computer. Not sure when we do it yet, but I did dig out a 1-wire temperature probe, and I'm going to see if I can hook that up to the 6522 VIA chip, if anyone remembers those kind of stuff. So I've been having a little too much fun playing with that instead of turning the radio on as much as I probably should. So I've been crazy busy the last month.
Yeah, sounds like it, Bill. And I'm going to come to your rescue here. I got 2 6502 microprocessor computers in the bottom of my junk room that really need to come out and have something done to them. I've got a couple of Apple IIs. One's an Apple II Euro and one's an Apple IIe. And one of them is a dual processor built. It's a 6502 or a Z80. And you could run the Apple OS on it, or the CPM, which was the free pre-runner of DOS. So I'm showing my age as well, Bill.
Look, Steve Wozniak was a Ham too, guys. So you're in good stead.
Yeah. So, Chris, what have you been up to?
Amateur radio-wise, not a huge amount. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be having the Monday Night Net, which I've been on a few times. I haven't done an awful lot of I've been in the HF a couple of times, but not very much at all. What I have been doing is trying to rationalise my amateur radio magazines. I bought an iPad a couple of weeks ago, and the intention was that I was trying to go paperless. So I get UST, Radcom, Practical Wireless. So I'm getting at least 3 magazines a month through the front door of subscriptions, which all end up taking up huge amounts of space. And they soon mount up. So I decided I wanted to go paperless. So when I to renew, and I've already, I think Practical Wireless is actually due to expire fairly soon. So that will be one that I will renew digital only. So that thing will be, I'll have it all electronic. So I won't need to have always paper everywhere. I can search online. It make my life a little bit easier. So that's the plan. Interestingly, I spoke to the RSGB because Radcom, you can't, well, it turns out you can, but it's not as simple as perhaps ticking a box. So with Radcom, you can opt out of receiving, because any member of the RSGB can actually look at Radcom online. You can go to the website of the RSGB and you can view the latest edition. In fact, you can also view, I think, previous editions as well as Radcom. And in fact, interestingly, a slight aside, Radcom are actually, so the RSGB are actually providing this month only, as part of this Get on the Air to Care campaign, a free copy of Radcom. If you want to see Radcom this month for free, you can go onto the the RSGB website and you can view it there, just a little bit of an aside. So that might be interesting to some people. There's quite an interesting article about VDS performance, so a bit of a plug there for that one. But back to my story. So it turns out I actually emailed the RSGB. I got a response from Steve Thomas, the general manager, saying you can email them and actually ask them to not send you a paper copy anymore. So that's what I will do. I haven't really got around to doing it yet. And it means I can still view it online. The only downside is you can't download it. Now, other magazine subscriptions or apps that let you download it and then take it offline. It would appear that Radcom you have to go online to view it via the website, but that's not a big deal. So that's what I'm to do. So that's kind of what I've been doing. The only other thing I've been doing is I bought another NMDBM board, and that's now working very well for D-Star, so I can work D-Star from home, and it runs the PyStar software, which I've talked about before in the podcast, and it's pretty good. And I'm going to try to get that working with DMR at some point. I know Martin's done a similar thing before. I'll try and get the DMR handheld program to use it, and try and perhaps finally get my head around DMR. So, yeah, that's it from me.
Yeah, so you've all been very busy. So, well, Frank, from my point of view, Frank mentioned I did the Denby Dale radio group talk last night. Nick Bradley, G4IWO, invited me to join them, and that was a pleasurable evening. Unfortunately, I can't do Wednesdays, and they normally meet on a Wednesday. It's quite strange. They changed their club night so I could do the talk for them. So I was a bit surprised at that, but it was enjoyable, very enjoyable. I've just renovated a heat kit valve audio generator, which I bought some time ago, and that was quite interesting. Our video of the museum, I'm quite impressed with what Colin done with that one. That was in the last show, and it's done reasonably well up on YouTube. There's lots of nice stuff that you can see, and I think most of us would like to go, and I want one of those, one of those, one of those, and one of those, because there's lots of good stuff there. I had a chat with an M7 the other day. M7 is a foundation license holder in the UK. He was on a repeater, very gingerly called. He passed his test September last year, and he called, and I went back to him, politely as always, and he tells me that I was only his second ever contact, which rather worried me. And he said, I'm worried about sort of doing calls. And I had to explain to him, I said, look, you're new, just let people know you're new, and people should help you. Anybody shouts at you is an idiot. We had quite a long chat, and I said, look, if you get it wrong, if you get your call sign wrong, or you do something wrong, nobody's going to die. It's a hobby. We'll help you through. And I think that's another reason why we have to be a bit more cooperative to the newbies when they come in. We have to help them through these things, because they are might shy. They're a little bit unsure. And as I said last night at the Denby Dale group, I would work if an M7 or a foundation call sign came up, and a full license call sign came up at the same time, I would work the foundation person, because they need more help. They need the practice. So kind of that's where I am. But the last thing from my point of view is I'm gutted. Absolutely gutted here, boys. Because this weekend I'd be starting my trip on my way out to meet you guys in Dayton, and it ain't happening. So really sorry about that. Was looking forward to being with you all. Unfortunately, it ain't going to happen. So we'll keep safe.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Ed and I signed up for Contest University online, since we were going to go see it next week in person.
Right. Well, I'm not a contester, so I didn't sign up for that one. But yeah, enjoy, guys, enjoy.
Martin, even if you're not a contester, there's parts in there about antenna design, about safety on maintenance. It's not just contesting. It's things that contesters do, but probably 50% of the content is valid for other things in amateur radio as well. So to the listeners, at least, if you can attend, go to contestuniversity.com, register. It's free, and even over this side, you should be able to see half of it during the normal hours. They're of course, they're starting at lunchtime and going past midnight as far as the UK and Europe are concerned. But it's also going to be recorded and available on YouTube afterwards as well.
And let me just postscript on Ed, Martin. If you go back previous years, for several years, the slides and information to most of the presentations are there. And they're just great reference materials, and you get a lot of neat ideas, kind of some insider baseball, if you will, for some of the stuff.
Well, I'll probably have a look at that when the videos come out, because next week I'm on late, so pretty much most of the day's gone by the time I get home. So, but that's my problem. I'll catch up with that. And thanks for the advice, boys. Well, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight. It's been great to have you with us. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Thank you, Martin. And it's been the usual fun and games.
Yeah, great to have you, mate. I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Thanks, Martin, and cheers to everybody. Stay safe, stay home.
Yep, agree with all that. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH, over there in the States.
Hey, glad to be back and enjoyed it immensely, guys.
Yeah, great to have you, Frank. And last but not least, Mr. Bill Barnes with his new call sign, WC3B. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Yes, thanks for having us again, and thanks everybody, and stay groovy, everybody.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we're moving on to the next part of the podcast. So 73s.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. Thanks first to Malcolm Howell, Foxtrot 4, Victor Romeo X-Ray for sending me in this story. And it's in a story about an amateur radio operator in Scotland, a gentleman called Terry Robinson. Terry is a 69-year-old amateur radio operator who enjoys his Morse code. Nothing strange about that, I'm sure you're thinking. Terry is also blind and has been taking this opportunity during the downturn activities to work on his antenna set up in his home, and since then has not only has been working many of the continents around the world, but he's also been working very hard at promoting the Royal National Institute for the Blind 150th anniversary, as well as encouraging his local community to have a look at amateur radio. It's a fantastic story. We're going to pop a link to the media story on this too on the ICQ podcast webpage, and thank you for Malcolm for letting us know about this story. For SOTA activators, you'll know about the company SOTA Beams, and news that Richard has decided to take a little bit of a backward step in the business, and has appointed his colleague Martin Jackson to become the new managing director. Now, Martin's been with the company and working away as their technical director for the last 4 years. He's developed some of their most popular products, including the Whisper Lite and the Wolfwave device. Now, we've reviewed the Wolfwave in previous episodes. Richard is going to be working away on some other things he does, in particular working away on a Radio Adventures series he's been working on, and obviously now getting some time to enjoy the hobby. We've spoken to Richard on many times, and myself and my colleagues at the ICQ podcast, Richard, I wish you a wonderful enjoyment of extra time in your life, and hope, you get to do many hours, working the radios and, enjoying the hobby. So thank you for all you've done, and congratulations to your successor there, Martin, and hopefully, you'll be able to continue to take the company from strength to strength. Now, I've got this piece of news in from Simon Taylor, Mike Whiskey 0, November Whiskey Mike, and he's letting us know about the Dragon Amateur Radio Club and the North Wales Radio Society. They're taking part on a special event station, GB0 Golf India Golf, which is Welsh for the National Health Service, and this is working upon the RSGB's project of their GOTA2C Get on the Air to Care campaign. They're going to have a station active on HF, VHF and UHF on as many modes as possible, and it will run until the 28th of May, operated from the homes of club members. And there's even an award as well, which is available, along with this work here. So congratulations to the guys there at Dragon Amateur Radio Club for setting up this wonderful event, in a Welsh tinge upon the national activities, and certainly a great cool sign to look out for in the hobby. Now, if you'd like to do what, Simon and also Malcolm did and forward stories to the ICQ podcast, nice and easy to do, visit icqpodcast.com and click on the contents page and let us know about what you're doing in the hobby. Well, that's feature time, and we're going to head over to our feature in this episode, which is restoring valve and tuber gear. As always, guys, really hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode's feature, I wanted to talk about restoring valve or tube gear, depending on which side of the pond you are. Now, this feature came about because I was repairing a Heathkit audio signal generator, and I was about to give it to a friend of mine, and then realised it wasn't working properly, so I thought I'd fix it first. Now, if you're following along, you do so at your own risk. What I'm saying is valid, but you have to be confident in your own safety. Now, in fairness, there are lots and lots of videos up on YouTube of how to fix valve gear, but unfortunately, they don't always give you all the information. So I'm going to give you some of the information you'll find in some of the videos up on YouTube, plus some practical tips, and hopefully I've pulled a lot of the things together into one audio commentary. So, as I said before, I was fixing a Heathkit audio frequency generator. Now, the main failures you get with valve equipment or tube equipment is in three areas, really: electrolytic capacitors, paper capacitors, and resistors. They are your main problem areas. Now, electrolytic capacitors, well, they do have the habit of leaking. Not only electrically, but they can leak physically. And in the past, I've had electrolytic capacitors leak over printed circuit boards, and it makes quite a mess of them. I won't cover how to fix that now, because that's irrelevant to this piece of equipment. But it is doable. So they go electrically leaky and they go physically leaky at times. Now, often smoothing capacitors, they're the big ones in the big cans, they go open circuit. So you end up with lots of hum on one thing or another. But then afterwards, they often, if you leave them for a while, they often go short circuit. Now, if they go short circuit, you're going to do a lot of damage to your devices. So the suggestion here is don't fit new capacitors in parallel with old ones. Effectively use tag strips and create new areas, put your new capacitors on a tag strip, because you'll often want to leave the old smoothing can in, because otherwise you've got a big hole in the chassis and it don't look very nice. So I often leave them in and just put a tag strip and the new capacitors on the tag strip. Now, the reason I say this is if your smoothing capacitor is going to open circuit and you put another capacitor in parallel across it, it'll probably work for a while. But what will happen is at some point in time, the capacitor may go short circuit. If it goes short circuit, chances are you'll burn your mains transformer out, because the rectifier will conduct heavily and draw lots of current, which will sweat the mains transformer up, and you might find all wax running out of it, and effectively that becomes a very expensive repair, which you could have got away with if you'd have done the job properly with a reasonable price capacitor. So don't put them in parallel. Now, I suggest you use the same voltage or higher. Don't be tempted. Don't look at something and go, oh, there's only 150 volts on this. I can use a 150 volt capacitor instead of, say, a 300 volt capacitor. Because if the manufacturers put a 300 volt capacitor in there, there's a fairly good chance there was a good reason for it. You've got to realise manufacturers are very tight, and the bean counters shave as much off of the cost as possible when they're producing these items. So be a little bit careful you don't underrate your new components. Moving on to paper capacitors. These are the wax type paper capacitors. And there is no point in checking these. They are electrically leaky. We don't even have to argue about that. Over time, the paper insulation or dielectric has gone acidic, and they are acting like resistors in parallel with a capacitor. So they leak, and it's horrible because they will damage your equipment if they're not replaced. Now, they often read higher in value when you use them on the tester. So if you've got a capacitor tester and you test the capacitor, it'll read a higher value. And for argument's sake, one of the paper capacitors in this device should have been a 0.47, ended up being nearly 2 microfarad. And you look at it and go, God, that's a good capacitor. It's 2 microfarad. No, the way the testers work is they measure how long it takes to get to a certain voltage level. Then they do the calculation on the value. Now, if your capacitor's leaky, obviously it's like putting a resistor in parallel with the capacitor. It takes far longer for it to charge to the value it needs. Therefore, your capacitor tester goes, look, this is a really good capacitor. So, but just be a little bit aware of that. You're wasting your time. Just change all the paper capacitors. Now, the old high voltage capacitor testers, they can be very dangerous. Heathkit made a number of them. ICO made a number. They can run up to 500-600 volts for testing capacitors. But in fairness, they may or may not show up as faulty when you're testing them. However, they can also find that you will effectively have problems later. So, I wouldn't bother wasting your time. A second-hand Heathkit capacitor tester these days, people have suddenly got very excited about owning them. You're looking at £100 before you start, and then you've got to renovate it, and you'll end up with a piece £150 or so. And what are you going to do? You're still going to have to change the paper capacitors, because even if it shows everyone's faulty, you still got to change it. So why waste your money on a capacitance tester? Now, microcapacitors, and they often look like dominoes and things like that, they're almost always okay, so you don't have to change those. Moving on to resistors. Resistors are another way of having a problem. Now, have a quick measure around to see if any of the resistors have gone high in value. Now, a fairly good option is to measure 3 or 4, depending, maybe half a dozen resistors. If they're fairly close to tolerance, then you're pretty much guaranteed that most of them will be okay, and you'll be safe to turn the thing on. Very rarely do resistors go low in value. They normally always go high in value. So you're looking for a resistor that's gone high in value. If your resistor is showing low in value in circuit, then there's something else in parallel with it. 99.999 times out of 100, there will be some device, either a capacitor, an inductor, or another resistor that's in parallel with it, that's reducing its value. So just be aware of that. And a quick look at the circuit diagram, you can probably see that. Or just remove one leg of the resistor. Valve/tube equipment, you can normally have a quick poke round on resistance, because when they're switched off, they are effectively high impedance devices. So the devices, the active devices, won't work. And have a look for burnt or cooked resistors. The burnt or cooked resistor may be due to a faulty capacitor that you've just changed, or it might be that the manufacturer effectively was underrating them. We used to have that back in the 70s when televisions came out. Often we'd find half-watt resistors in certain valve circuits, and after about a year, 18 months, that resistor would fail, and you put a 1-watt resistor in, and it would never fail again. So, yeah, manufacturers can be naughty, but have a look, see if there's any burnt or dodgy resistors, and then if you see any, check them out. Try and understand why they cooked up, and that will save you a lot of heartache at a later date. Now, last thing, and I should have mentioned this with electrolytics, but certainly after you've powered them up, be aware, electrolytic capacitors do hold their charge, sometimes for hours or even days. So be careful putting your fingers in, because a device that's switched off may have capacitors, certainly in valve tube equipment, up around the 300-400 volts sitting on them, just waiting to bite you. So just be a little bit careful. Now, when it comes to powering up, I always do this, and it's very simple. I have a current limiter, and it sounds very complicated, but effectively, and you can make it to any design you decide, but effectively it is a light bulb, an incandescent light bulb of, say, 60 watts in series with the live side of the mains cable. So the live through the bulb to the device. And when you turn the device on, it will light up, but should never light up bright. But it will light up and then die away and then light up again as the device comes up. Now, the initial light up is effectively the tube heaters, because the tube heaters are cold when you first switch it on. So because they're cold, a fair amount of current gets drawn until they go high resistance and they glow nice and red. Then, so you see that initial glow in your light bulb and then drop back. And then as the device comes up to temperature, you'll find that the light bulb starts to light again. Now, once again, that light bulb is reducing your HT volts or your AC volts into the device. Therefore, you won't be running at full voltage, but it's enough to stop if you have a faulty device or a faulty component. Let's say you have a short circuit straight across the mains. That light bulb will glow absolutely bright white like it would normally do when you're using it as a light bulb. And it would protect the device under test. So any which way you like to build one, they're well worth doing. And if you have a variac, you might want to try with a variac. Lastly, and I'm going to be honest about this again, once again, you're doing this at your own risk. Yeah, you have to be comfortable with your own ability. If you're not comfortable with your own ability, then don't do it. Your safety and continued listenership is more important to us than you killing yourself. Please be very safe. That's the most important thing. Well, I hope this was of interest, and let's hear what some of you may have to say about it.
Well, Dad, thanks a lot again for your feature, Restoring Valves and Tube Gear. Certainly very relevant after our visit there to the Radio Museum in Derby that we detailed on the last episode, and I know many of you have seen on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ICQ podcast. If you've got any passion and love of vintage radios, or remembering devices you may have owned in the past and let go, or just want to be jealous about their wonderful workbench, certainly check out that video. Bit of feedback from our colleague Dan Romacek, KB6 November Uniform. Dropped us a couple of lines for a couple of things just to let everyone know about. Tell us as well about the Contest University will be held via Zoom. This obviously is the event that would have been taking place at Dayton Hamvention. So say you'll be able to get involved there. Visit contestuniversity.com say to register. Say if that would have been something that you would have taken part in next week in Dayton. That's quite weird, that isn't it? In fact, to think that we should have been packing bags as we speak and getting ready to fly over to Ohio. It's quite weird to think we're not going, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I said in the podcast, Colin, I was gutted I'm not going, because I did want to spend some time with a group of us together. We don't get that many times in the year where a large group of ICQ presenters get together, and this was one big opportunity that we've missed this year.
Oh, true. But you know what? But it did prove, though, how quick we could pull that trip together. So, there's always opportunities for the future, they say. Dan also tells us well about the ARRL making some additional benefits available to members at this time, which is along the lines of making digital versions available of QEX and the National Contesting Journal for members. So if you're an ARRL member and those things interest you, do check out those couple of services that could be available to you from there. So as I say, goes on Dan to point us in the direction of those couple of things. So say with Dayton not going ahead, so we'll be running a bit of a rerun on the ICQ podcast website, revisiting Dayton 2019, just to see if we can just gently get those pangs of desire to be at a convention. So showing some of our interviews from last year that you might find of interest. But I say in the meantime, I suppose with Friedrichshafen and Cordova as well, and potential next one's going to be the UK Hamfest at the end of September. So we're waiting to hear how that one works away from there. Now I'd like to check in with you, Dad. Is there anything else going on next fortnight at all that you might need to let us all know about?
Well, if I'm a lucky boy later, I'm starting renovation of a VHF tabletop broadcast radio, circa 1962 UK Hacker Mayflower 2. And I kind of want to do this, so I've just finished renovating that signal generator, as I said. The next one's the radio, and then after that, if all goes well, after that, it's the HRO I've got to do. So I'm suspecting Sunday, the day we release this, the weather's not going to be too nice. So if I can keep Mrs. B active other ways, I'll be using her kitchen as a workshop again, and she don't like that.
It's either that, or I hope you get good weather and you can do a barbecue and take over the kitchen for that excuse as well. But we'll see how it goes. Well, I'd like to thank our colleagues, Chris, Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Ed, DD5, Lima Papa, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Bill Barnes, Whiskey Charlie 3, Bravo. So there you go, Bill, got your new call sign right, for joining us on the News Roundtable. Mentions as well the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ICQ podcast for, a very interesting video of the Radio Communications Museum. And I say you can check out our other videos there while you're checking out that side as well. Make sure as well you sign up for our newsletter on the website. So keep in touch with the information, obviously, regarding COVID-19, how that's affecting the hobby. So hopefully as well you'll continue to enjoy the fact we're keeping the show very light-hearted in general and pushing that stuff to the social media channels, for you to check out. So you get an hour or so's worth of pleasurable time where everyone has a team at the doom and gloom in the world. Right, well, say the most important thing is if you're going to pinch Mum's table for a bit of a workbench over the weekend, I better set you off to make her a cup of tea and find her a chocolate biscuit to sweeten her up.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a cup of tea in a minute, and then we're going out to do our daily exercise, and your mum wants to wander down to the local shop. So we're going to do that, Colin, and then when I come back, a few little jobs, and then I'll start renovating this radio with a bit of luck.
Perfect. Well, listen, I'll leave you be to that. But everyone's 73s, and we'll catch up with you again in a fortnight's time on 73s.
Yeah, 73s.